Welcome to The Humble Philosopher. So today I'm going to be reacting to a short piece of Robert Sapolsky on the Jordan Peterson podcast. Yesterday I published a reaction piece to Donald Hoffman on the Jordan Peterson podcast. And I think that they're both making the same mistake when it comes to evolutionary theory. And so one of the ideas that I'm trying to put forward on this channel is something I call Dennett's demon. So Daniel Dennett is a Darwinian philosopher, cognitive theorist, many books to his name. One of them is Darwin's Dangerous Idea. And in this book, he puts forward the classic neo-Darwinian argument that evolution, all on its own, random mutation acting on natural selection, is sufficient to bring dust into Steve Jobs unveiling the iPhone. In this book is the only mathematical treatment of that I've ever seen, the only mathematical formulation of how that might actually work. And so you can find it in chapter 2, pages roughly 52 to 54. And basically, he's making two assertions. One is that evolution acts as a classical algorithm, and that number two, any amount of given a sufficient input into that algorithm, any output is not only likely but guaranteed. And so the way that would generally work is something like a bracketed tournament, right? If you've ever filled out a Final Four tournament, March Madness, there are 64 teams that enter, and one team is guaranteed to go on a 6-game winning streak because it's single elimination. You only go to the next round if you've won. And so if you survive all the way to the end, you will have 6 wins with 64 teams entering, and that guarantees that somebody's going to win 6 games in a row. So it's a very straightforward statistical argument, which is at heart what neo-Darwinism is. And he sets it up as a bracketed tournament like that. And he just says, you see, if you have enough entrants, somebody's guaranteed to give you the number of mutational events that you need to cobble dust into Steve Jobs. At very low numbers, such as 6 consecutive wins, 10 consecutive wins, 20 consecutive wins, it seems to hold together. The problem is, of course, that in order to cobble dust into Steve Jobs, you need trillions of consecutive wins. You need trillions of specific mutational events that all have to happen in order to give you Steve Jobs from dust. When you plug those numbers in, so on one side of the algorithm, you have the number of mutational events that you need, the number of wins, right? And when you have like 1 million, right? So the simplest cells are about 1 trillion times more complex than the molecules that they're made of. And then the organisms that are made of those cells are then 1 trillion times more complex than those cells. But even when you get to 1 million, if you're just trying to account for 1 million, based on Dennett's own math, the arch materialist, he'll be on a upcoming episode of Theories of Everything with Kurt Jaimungal. When you're just trying to account for 1 million, which would be an extraordinary simple organism, I mean, there may be no organisms that's that simple. The number of mutational events that you would have to plug into that, the variation that natural selection would have to act on in order to get you those 1 million mutational events, is a number with over 300,000 digits. To give you an idea of how large a number that is, the number of atoms in the known universe is a number with 81 digits. And so when I read that in Darwin's Dangerous Idea, and he lays the math out for you and just sort of expects that you're too stupid to follow it to its logical conclusion. When I read that, I just, I couldn't believe that he put that in there. But when you run his own numbers and you adhere to his own formula, the whole thing falls apart. And so you say, oh, well, okay, Dennett got it wrong. Okay, well, Dennett got it wrong. Well, then somebody else needs to get it right, because this is the thing that we need to prove that evolution can do engineering. So, how does that relate to Donald Hoffman? Well, when I'm watching and listening to Donald Hoffman, at a certain point, he will take the conversation into his territory, which is math. And he will give you mathematical terms and definitions. And then he'll say, on the other side of that math, it looks like we're all, looking at reality through this headset that evolution made, and it can't give us the true picture of reality. Except that no one has ever proven that evolution can make anything. Nobody has ever shown how that would actually look. And so that's Dennett's demon. Dennett is the only one that's ever put forward a mathematical formulation of how that would work. I mean, it's just a statistical argument. There's been enough variation and enough time for random mutation to act on that variation to take dust and make it Steve Jobs. It's super simple, right? I mean, it's very big, but it's not necessarily complex. And so nobody's ever shown that. And the only one to put forward a mathematical argument is Daniel Dennett. And when you run his own numbers, they require absurdly large numbers at the input to get the outputs that you need. And so no one has ever proven that evolution can be creative. And so a guy like Donald Hoffman comes in and he says, okay, I'm running this math and it's coming out to these, interesting philosophical conclusions. But what he's really doing, all right, and this is actually probably the best explanation you're going to get on the internet of what Donald Hoffman's really up to, is something akin to running economic models, right? To say I've got a ledger for a fictional business, or I'm running complex models of supply and demand, how taxes would work into that. And I have, algorithms that represent entrepreneurs and algorithms that represent labor and algorithms that represent government. And look at this amazing engineering that springs forth from that. Except numbers like that can't do engineering. And so you may think, well, you're just saying that, so says you. If math could engineer, we would have the most powerful computers on Earth engineering for us brand new forms that we would never think of in our entire lives, right? Artificial intelligence is all the rage. And I would like to put you back against artificial intelligence because it's just computation. There's no intelligence involved. Intelligence is consciousness in action. And machines will never house consciousness because of Gödel's incompleteness theorem, but that's another argument. All right, collect my thoughts here. So what Donald Hoffman is doing, since it's been the Darwinian tradition to ignore that nobody has ever shown how Darwinism could do the engineering, all he has to do is throw in functions, and he's assuming that those functions in some matrix of a game theory and some, computer model that he's running are generating the forms that they would need to perform their own functions, right? It's a chicken and egg problem. Please forgive the jump cut. You'd be surprised how stressful it is to do these in one take. In some ways, this is easier than writing, but in other ways, it's a lot more difficult because you can't go back and read and edit and change things around. And so I was talking about the chicken and egg problem. And so basically, the whole in all of Hoffman's theory is that he needs an actual headset, not a theoretical headset, not an abstract headset, not a mathematical headset. He needs an actual headset for his theory to be true. And what he's doing is he's assuming that the engineering is happening because his mathematical models are telling him so. But that's not the way that reality works. There's the problem of irreducible complexity, such that you have these parts that don't have any function of their own, that have to come together in a very specific way. And this is the problem of creativity. This is the problem of, in Sapolsky's own words, magic. I was, watching an interview with him the other day, and they were like, tell us about this new book, Determined, and that we have no free will. And he says, I'm of a very small minority that says we have no free will at all. And the interviewer says, why? And he says, well, because otherwise, magic. And it's like, okay, maybe, right? Can we entertain that that's a possibility? Can we accept that perhaps as a first condition, creativity and intelligence is innate in the universe? We can accept that material, that matter and energy are initial conditions of the universe. They're just things that exist, right? Why can't we assume that intelligence is, if we have all this reason to believe so? So I promised that this was a response to Sapolsky. I'm sorry, these are, very large questions. And with that Dennett's demon, I'm really trying to, show very clearly that there's this thing that has been skipped over. And I'll make as many videos, I guess, as I have to make that point. But listen to here. I'm going to share my screen. Listen here to Sapolsky's own words. Jordan Peterson is asking him about game theory, and then he turns it into this really sophomoric evolutionary argument. And maybe you'll see what I see. I'll comment on it after it's over. But I just can't believe that this sort of stuff still passes, and passes at the highest level. It's interesting how somebody's prestige sort of precedes them, and like everybody who talks about Sapolsky, he just automatically has this aura of like, he's at that Einstein level. But the evolutionary assumptions that he's making here are just absurd.
But please let everybody know what game theory is and why it's so important.
Sure. Maybe, well, just to emphasize the point you made right from the start, that this is not fun and games. Game theory was mostly the purview of war strategists and diplomats and people planning, mutually assured destruction. So this was rather serious stuff. At some point, the biologists got a hold of it, and especially zoologists. And the sort of rationale was, like, you look at a giraffe and you're some cardiovascular giraffe person, and you do all these calculations about, like, if you're going to have a head that's that far above your heart and you're going to have this body weight and blah, blah, whatever, you're going to have a heart with its walls that are this thick or this like vascular properties. And then the scientists go and study it, and that's exactly what you see. Isn't that amazing? Isn't nature wonderful? Or like, you look at desert rats and you do all this theoretical modeling stuff and figure out if they're going to survive in the desert, their kidneys have to retain water at this unbelievable rate. And then people would go and study it. And that's exactly how the kidneys work. Isn't that amazing? And it's not so amazing because, like, if you're going to have giraffes shaped like giraffes, the heart has to be that way. There is an intrinsic logic to how it had to evolve. And if you're going to be a desert rodent, there's an intrinsic logic to how your kidneys go about living in the desert. And the whole notion of game theory as applied to evolution, animal behavior, human behavior, et cetera, is there's an intrinsic logic. The logic of our behavior has been as sculpted by evolutionary exigencies as the logic of our hearts and the logic of our kidneys and everything else in there. And by the time it comes to behavior, a lot of it is built around when is the optimal time to do X and when do you do the opposite of X.
So, am I alone in? Um, I mean, there's so much to unpack there, but just how rudimentary that explanation is, how lacking in power it is, how this, I mean, a giraffe's heart is an incredibly complex organ, and it's the way it is because it has to be that way and it couldn't be any other way. And that's the best you got for me. And this absurd notion that you would bother to make this prediction that you could just go out and get a giraffe heart and see if you, right, why that's a perversion of prediction as validating a theory. You don't predict something that you don't need to predict. You predict things that you can only find out about through your prediction, right? That's Einstein level theory. I actually went to they had an installation at the Field Museum in Chicago on evolutionary theory. This was back about 20 years ago. And I was watching, they had this little short documentary, one of these little rooms you go into and you watch a film. And one of the biologists was saying that without evolution, without theory, biology is just stamp collecting, right? And so there's even this sort of vain reason why biologists hold on to evolutionary theory, because without it, we're just, yeah, you're just dissecting things. You're just collecting stamps. You're just pointing out structures that are right there. There's no need to, prior to looking at a giraffe's heart, predicting the structure. There's no predictive value in that. And so even a guy like Sapolsky is just saying, oh, there's this mathematical functions. Oh, there's just this brute logic that is doing this amazing engineering. And nobody's giving it a mathematical formulation except Dennett. Dennett's own numbers require absurd numbers for them to work, things that the universe couldn't sustain, let alone little old Earth. And so Dennett's own math doesn't work. That's Dennett's demon. And so anybody on theories of everything who can prove me wrong on Dennett's own math has $1,000 coming to them. Or if they can put something in place of that that works, they won't be able to. But I'm man of my word, I'll give you $1,000 if you can do it. And so that's Dennett's demon. And it's just pointing out, like, look, nobody's even done the statistical work on this. And then there's what I call Richard Dawkins' homework, which is, okay, you got the giraffe heart. Now deconstruct that giraffe heart backwards in time in a way that each instantiation, a way that each genetic leap makes sense statistically with Dennett's demon. How does that look till you get back to no heart at all? And nobody does either of those things. And they don't do it because they can't do it. And what I was saying earlier before I had to do that jump cut was that if anybody actually took this theory seriously, we wouldn't bother with artificial intelligence. What we'd want is artificial evolution. Evolution can take dust and turn it into Steve Jobs. So why wouldn't, and it's a simple algorithm according to Daniel Dennett himself. So why wouldn't we just take that algorithm and put it in a supercomputer and let it go and just create the, just wildest creations that we never would even imagine possible? It's because numbers can't create. Numbers have no inherent meaning in and of themselves. Numbers only represent those things we've said a priori ourselves they represent. There's no meaning in the numbers. There's no meaning in the math. Just because Donald Hoffman has functions working its way through some game theory doesn't mean that it could spin out the three-dimensional structure that it would need to get there, to build the very headset he says we're watching reality with, right? Or he's just trying to reduce everything then to this mathematical abstraction, which would be dead because math can't handle meaning, says Kurt Gödel, the greatest logician of all time. Okay, so roundabout, but I think there's some solid ideas in there. And just as the humble philosopher, just as a lay philosopher, a private philosopher, I'm just throwing these things out there. Maybe somebody else can, pick this up, understand what I'm saying, and do a better formalization of those ideas. But nobody can beat Dennett's demon. Nobody can bring a replacement for Dennett's demon, and nobody can do Dawkins' homework. That's a challenge to everybody. The whole damn internet. Nobody can do it.